Hello and welcome to the first ever online OpenValue meetup on YouTube. We are happy to present here from our studio in Utrecht. And tonight you can enjoy two talks, one about end-to-end testing with Cypress and the second one about multi-platform development with Kotlin. So you're not here to listen to me, but you're here to listen to and to watch our first speaker for tonight, and this is Jogchem Dijkstra.
Hi, let me take you on a quick tour through Cypress. My name is Jogchem Dijkstra. I'm a developer for OpenValue. Let's say I'm specialized in Java, but I touch all the stuff. And today I want to show how I've used Cypress and how you might want to use it as well. So on the agenda, I'll first give a quick introduction about Cypress, what it is, what you can do with it. I'll show a few use cases, how I've used it and how colleagues of mine have used it. And that should only take a few minutes because then we get to the live coding. We'll go through one of the official Cypress tutorials very quickly, so you get a look at almost all the aspects of Cypress. And then hopefully we'll have some time for questions as well. So very quickly, what's Cypress? It's a tool for testing web applications, both through the UI, but you can also make backend calls, so you could test an API as well. The big advantage is that you write your code as if it's synchronous code, and then Cypress handles all the asynchronous mess. So like navigating to a page, it will wait for the page to load, and you don't have to do anything for that. And you don't have to use Selenium or WebDriver. Cypress talks directly to the browser, and that's also why not all browsers are supported. So when Cypress started, you could only use Chrome, but they're currently supporting Firefox, Electron, Edge, and Brave as well. So you shouldn't use Cypress to do a browser test and check compatibility against all the browsers. You should just use it to check if your application is working as expected functionally. And if you just want to get started, just do an npm install Cypress and npx Cypress open, and you get a basic set of tests that test against a test website of Cypress itself. So you can just have a look at the code and see how it works. And then when we have the test pyramid, you can use Cypress for all levels. So most people use it for end-to-end testing, just to click through an application, but you can also just boot up a few components and test those. And you can do component testing, and then you almost get into the terrain of unit testing because you're running tests against a single component. Then a few use cases. The first time I used Cypress was a few years ago at the CarePay organization, which is a Kenyan company that provides payment options for health insurance. And what we noticed is that there were a lot of different services. They weren't communicating with each other as expected. So we needed a way to test a whole flow through all those components, and we used Cypress for that. And the cool thing was as well that we used Cucumber to write the test scenarios, and then we used the same scenario for to run backend tests with JUnit and run the front-end tests with Cypress. And then, so that's more the end-to-end level. And currently I'm using Cypress mostly to automate my own work. So when I have to write a feature, I'll first create a quick throwaway test in Cypress. to go through the application, because often you think, oh well, this is just 3 clicks to test this, but then you keep switching to your browser, doing those 3 clicks, maybe navigating to a specific page. And of course, when you have a script, it just you can go to that page immediately, and you just see your tests running on a separate screen. And a colleague of mine is using it at bol.com to do component testing. So they have a test harness that will basically create a new page and deploy the component there, and then you run tests against that individual component. And then it's also used to run UI tests and check API calls as well. So that's it for the use cases, and then we can go to the fun stuff. And so you notice I'll be looking at my screen a lot because I just want to do some coding. We're going to use the official Cypress test the React Todo app. So of course we're going to create a to-do application. And I've already cloned the repository, of course. So I'll start by running the application, and we'll automatically deploy. We'll check that we have it running. And if you want to go through the tutorial yourself, you can find it on the Cypress website. Okay, so what we have now is a very bare bones to-do application. And in the tutorial, you'll also see how to implement all the features in React. We're going to skip over that a bit and just look at how we would test it with Cypress. Now, if we look at our package.json, we already have Cypress as a development dependency. So we're going to run that. And there's 2 ways of running Cypress. Either when you're developing with a UI like this, you use open, but you can also run it from the command line, of course, and it just executes your tests. So you'd use that in a pipeline. We have one test which does nothing yet except navigating to the home page. So we see our application here. And now we're going to write our first test. Cypress puts the tests in or reads the test from the Cypress integration folder in your project. So we have a stub here. And what you do is just basic JavaScript test syntax. So we'll describe some functionality and then put some test cases in there. And what we want our application to do is to put focus on the input element when we load the page. So we visit our home page, and then we'll use Cypress to find the input element, which is a class new to do. And then we can create an assertion. And we say we want it to have focus. No, we're not doing semicolons here. So when I save this, it automatically reruns our test. And we see the steps on the left-hand side. And we see the visit went okay. And then it found the input element as well. So if we hover over the step, we can see what it matches. And then it does an assert and it wants it to be focused, but we also see no blinking cursor there. It doesn't have focus yet. So we need to fix our application. And this is the React bit. That's not that interesting. We'll just put autofocus here. Save it, and then when we rerun our test, we see a green assert. Easy. Then, of course, we also want to be able to type some text there. Let's should accept input. And of course, we have to visit again. And then we again need to get the new to-do element. And then we're going to type some text into it. And the API is pretty straightforward. When we want to type text, we just say type. And then we want to add a to-do item to learn Cypress. And now something that will seem a bit strange. I'm going to put a assert there. Because after I typed learn Cypress, I want the input box to have the value learn Cypress. And we'll get to why that's important in a bit. For now, I'll save it. And we see that Cypress has run both our tests. And if we want to put focus on a single test, we can say it only. And now we see it just runs the one test. So that's nice while developing. And then we can do some refactoring because we see we always want to visit the home page. So we'll add a before each. And then we want to visit our home page, and then we can remove it here and here. And if we run it again, and we look at our test scenarios, we can see the before each. It does a visit, and then the actual test scenario. And now we have a URL in here, hard-coded. We might want to put that in some external configuration. You can use cypress.json for that, or you pass it as a command line parameter, but we want this to be the default, and then you could change it at runtime. For example, run against a specific, the test against a specific test environment. And then here we can do, I think, and now we see it closed our test because we changed something in the environment variables, and then I didn't. Oh, the fun of live coding. Let's see if this is okay. Forget it. We're going to there we go. Of course, we don't need to put the base URL there. We just say visit the root path, and then we can see our test is working again. Okay. And now we have this assertion on the text that we just typed, which might seem a bit odd, but sometimes your application changes the text while you go. So for example, here we saved the text that was typed in the state of the component, or save the application. So say, for example, that we forgot to update the state on an input change. Now if we run our tests, we can see that it's found the element, it typed the text, but then the state was never updated, so the input doesn't show that value. And I've had it happen with application I was testing myself as well. that I first typed some text and then I selected something from a drop-down, and apparently that reloaded a part of the form, and my input text was gone. So it's always good to check your inputs. And now, of course, we want to see that we can actually create new to-do items. And what we've done now, this is all about the input element. But now we want to create a new context because we're talking about the form submission, and we want to keep that separate in our output. And we want it to add a new to-do item when we submit. So we get the element again, and we type some text. And then we're going to press the enter key, and yeah, there's some some magic strings you can use for like pressing the up key or any other non-printable. So going to hit enter, and then let's see if that's already working. So we visit, we get the element, we type learn Cypress, and then we hit enter, and we see it as this default form behavior of then reloading the current page. But of course, we wanted to make a backend call to create the item. In our application, we already have the code for that. So we can see that now when we run the test, it actually does a XML HTTP request, and we get a 404 and an error message. But for the test, we don't really care about the actual backend. We're just testing the front end for now. So we want to mock or stub the backend. For that, we can use Cypress server, and then we create a route for the backend call. And we're expecting a post to /API. Where are we? /todos. And then we want to stub the result. So what we're going to return is the name learn Cypress, and it has to have an ID as well. Let's give it 1. So now what Cypress will do is it will create a server to proxy all the XML HTTP requests. So now we see that where first we had a 404 because we didn't have the backend running. We now get a 200. And if we look in inside the inspector, we can actually see the call and the request object and the response. And we can see the response that we mocked here. So this is also a very nice way to test how your front end reacts to different responses, like 404s or 500s or whatever. You can just create a route and mock those. Now that we returned the to-do, we want it to show up in the list, of course. So we get the to-do list, and then all the list items in there. And of course, we've added one, so we can say it should have length 1. And also the new to-do input should have been cleared. So that should have value empty string. So we save and it gets run. And indeed we have the one item in the list, but the input isn't cleared yet. We're going to fix that in the application. And so what we wanted to do is when we get something, we wanted to clear the current to-do. And now the input gets cleared and everything is green again. And then, like I said, we can check for error responses as well, and see that it correctly shows the error message.
So before we do that, Jogchem, we have some
Yes.
questions from the audience. So David is asking, how much abstraction do you use, given some of your elements may get a different attribute, for example, different class attributes? So do you add extraction layers like page objects or something, or what are good practices for handling these type of things?
Yeah, I guess it really depends on your application. What I do myself is I usually just create commands. We'll get to that in a bit in the tutorial as well. So you can actually extend the language of Cypress. So I can say, for example, in the application I'm currently working on, for some reason, sometimes you have to load the page twice to actually get it to work. So I just have a navigate to method, and then there I have a custom code to handle that behavior, and I have a click button command that knows how to find the button in that application and click it.
Yeah, so well, you're a consultant just like me, so the answer is always it depends, I guess. But
yeah,
it truly depends here.
It really depends on the application. The philosophy from Cypress itself is that if it's hard to test your application, you should change your application.
Sure. Yeah.
So what you often see is that they'll just create special data attributes on the inputs, so you can give it a very specific test-friendly handle and use that in your tests. Though you don't depend, because now we're depending on classes, but of course they might change. So it's better to introduce specific test identifiers.
Yeah. We have another question from Rachel. Rachel is asking, are typed assertion methods available, or is it only string-based?
Typed assertions are also available, and what you can do there is I think you can do a shoot and then have the element, and then you can just do when I have the correct syntax, you can just do expect to do, and then you have to have, etc. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. So David and Rachel, thanks for your questions. Please keep them coming. Ask them through the YouTube chat, and I will relay them to Jogchem at the appropriate time.
Okay. So let's check the error message. So now what we're going to do is we're going to return an error code. For that we have to use a slightly different call of the route method, because now we have to specify some options. So I have a method and no, that's not called path, URL. And then we're going to return a status code, and we want to simulate a server error. So just returning status 500. And I have to specify response object as well. I'm just going to return an empty response. And then, well, we're going to get something to fill. So our to do is a failure. We're going to press enter. And then we shouldn't have any list items. So we want this to not exist. And we have an error element, and that should be visible. So there we go. And we see the status 500 being returned, and indeed we see a failed message. That's it for the creating an element and it failing. So now we're going to continue to checking that the app loads correctly, because of course there might already be some to-do items in the database, and we want those to show up. So we're going to create a new I don't think we want this. Oh well, let's skip through it. So what we can do is we can create a new test file, and we're going to describe the app initialization. And what we do here is we're going to seed our application. And this is now a custom command. So if we look in the Cypress support folder, we have a commands file. And here we're introducing a new command, seed and visit. And what it does, it loads data from a fixture file. It initializes the Cypress server. And then we'll have a route for the get API to-dos, and then we're going to return that data. And fixtures are put in the fixtures folder, of course. So here we have just a JSON file with the seed data. So if we look at our test scenario, we're going to seed it so that loads fixture, and then visit the home page, and then we want to see 4 items. So we're going to reload, and of course we want this to reload as well. And it doesn't want to show the new file. So let's restart it. And there we have it, the app initialization. And also, what's also nice is that in the output you can see that this call is stopped. So we know it's not an actual backend call. And then we have the 4 items. And then whenever we have a failure in the loading of the initial items, we want to see an error message as well. So we can check that. And here we see we stop the call, we get a 500, and we see an error message. Okay. Now what we're going to check is that the list items are displayed correctly. If they've been marked done, they should be crossed out. So what we're going to do is create a new test file. And it's gone. New file. Let's call that list items. And we're going to describe the list items. We already know that for every test we want to start with some test data, so we'll add it before each, and we'll start with a seed and visit. And then it should properly display completed items. So what we're going to do is we mark a to-do item as complete and then show that that renders correctly. So what we do is we go into our fixture and then we say by X that has been completed. And then when we load our data, we want to say that our list items, when we filter on the class completed, then that should have length 1. And then we can add other assertions by using AND. It should contain the word eggs, because that's what we marked done. And then there's a toggle element in there, in that list item, so we're going to find that and then say that that should be checked. So if now we run this test, we can see that the second item is crossed out, and we check that. Then we're going to, you should be able to remove items from the list as well. So we're going to test that. That should remove the to-do. So now we want to stop the delete call. And that's not supported by default, so we should create some options object. So say method is delete, and then you're going to delete the first item, and then we'll return status 200 and an empty response. So now when we going to select all the list elements, then we just want first. That's easy as invoking first. Then we're going to find the destroy button, and we're going to click it. Let's run this. And now we get a failure. Because what's happening is that the delete button is only showing up when we hover over the item. And in our test, when we find the element, it does find the destroy button, but it's not visible, so it doesn't want to click on it. And it tells you what's happening and how you can fix it. So there's two ways of fixing this in your test. It's either by making the element visible, or we can just force the click. But the nice thing is that by default, it won't interact with elements that are not visible. Because otherwise your test might pass, but then as a user you can't actually see the button that you need to click on. So for now we're just going to force the click. And now when we run, it can click the element, and it should actually have been removed now. Let's just add an assert for that. We're going to give the list an alias, so we can use the same get again. So we don't have to type the to-do list Lee here, but we can use the alias. And then it should have removed one item, so it should have length 3 now. And it should no longer contain the word milk. And that's broken, so let's see in our application if we actually handled the delete. We didn't do that yet, so we're implementing that. Now we rerun our test, and we can see the item was removed.
We have some questions, Jochem.
Yes.
So Bart is asking, what is your strategy with maintaining your fixture files? So with growing apps, these things can get out of control in his experience. Do you have any advice to handle this?
Try to use them not too often. There's an example in the tutorial as well. So try to just mock the data in place for a specific test case, not depend on fixture files too much, because they tend to get shared between test scenarios as well, and they'll start to interfere. But yeah, it's a problem. So for CarePay, we also set up a few classes to basically store state within the test. And use that.
Yeah, I think that's also kind of where David's next question is about. He is asking, does Cypress allow you to make your stubs dynamic? So can you control your stubs from your Cypress code? I guess if you can control them over JavaScript, then you can control them from Cypress as well.
It's just JavaScript code, so yeah, you can just create some classes to manage state. But yeah, you have to be careful, because you don't want to depend on external state too much for your tests to run.
Yeah, maybe you could initialize your mocks at the start of the test, etc.
Yeah.
Okay. And then Dennis states, dealing with business rules where dates are involved is also a bit of a pain. Do you feel his pain?
Yeah, dates are horrible. Luckily, I myself haven't used those with Cypress yet, because we didn't have that at CarePay, and currently I'm just writing throwaway tests. So if a date is involved, I'll just put it a month away if it needs to be in the future, and I know my feature will be released before then, and then it's fine. Yeah, one thing is that Cypress bundles a few utility libraries, so like underscore, but also moment. So you can use moment.js to do date manipulation.
Okay, thanks. Well, that's it for the questions for now.
Okay. Okay, let's just continue. Forget about the failing tests because that's just the demo gods interfering. So now it's all green again. So what we're going to do now is to see that we can actually toggle the items and mark them completed. So in our list item file, going to create a new test case. And we want to mark an item that's not complete yet. And then it should be complete. Now, for that, we have a backend call as well to actually update the state of the item. What we want to do is now be in control which item is complete, because we're not. What we did the other time was mess around in the fixtures file, but other tests might depend on that. So let's not do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to load the fixture here. I can just use the file name without JSON. Then we get a promise, and we can do stuff with the loaded list. And then we'll get an element from that list. And here we can see that we can use underscore JS, just like so. And we'll get the head of the to-dos list. And then we're going to create a route that handles the change of that item. So when we get a put on, and we're going to use the actual ID. So now we are protected from changes in the fixtures file, and then we're going to return. Going to merge, going to get that same to-do item, and then we're going to set is complete to true. So now whatever the data in the fixtures file is, this should work as marking it complete. So now we're going to get the items again. We're going to get the first element and give it an alias. So we can do a check on it later. So with that first to-do item, we're going to find the toggle element. We're going to click it. And then we're going to check that after clicking it, it should be checked. And then now we did some logic on the toggle element. So everything after this line is about the toggle button and or checkbox. But now we want to say something about the actual to-do item again. So here we say it should get a class completed. And then, of course, We have a failing test because our application code is not implemented yet. So we have some very ugly code here to handle the toggling of an element. And now when we rerun the test, it should have been green. So, okay, what we can see here is that the put actually returns 404. So we didn't stop it correctly. And what's the problem there? I'll just skip to the next bit if this is too complicated. That does have ID 1. Okay. Wrong quotes. So there we go. Now the item is crossed out. And we have a bug in our code, and we're not going to fix that because that takes too long for this session. So we're just going to skip ahead. And so I'd advise you to do the tutorial yourself, because the first time they introduce this code, you think, why? And then, of course, they're going to fix it to some cleaner and better code. So on to the last bit. Yeah, and what I also didn't show you just now is that you can very easily put a debugger statement within, for example, an assertion or a Cypress command, and then your debugger will pause, and then you can inspect the situation as it is at that point in the test. So that helps with debugging the actual application as well. So now what we have in our application is we have this this footer that shows some information about the to-dos, and you can filter on only the active or the completed items. And so let me just show you those. Oh, cool. Let's just show you those texts. So what we did with that see then visit command was that we added a parameter where you can just specify your own list of items. So here we don't depend on that fixture. We just say, okay, we have the one item, and we can check that in the footer it says there's one to do left. And then we do some checks on multiple to-dos as well. And here we have a pattern of having parameterized tests. So what we do is we want to check a few different cases. So for those different filter links, we know how many items we expect. So we can use those as parameters. And then we'll use Cypress wrap that basically pulls this list into a Cypress context. And then we can do an each on that and then run Cypress commands for every item. And you shouldn't do filters dot for each. Because the whole magic of Cypress is that it makes this synchronous looking code, turns it into asynchronous code, and when you mix actual normal JavaScript synchronous code with Cypress, everything will fill. So that's it for the live coding. Any questions?
Yes, we have questions. I think one final question from David. He's asking, did you run into any incompatibility with libraries like Vue or Backbone? You know, if you need to hook into some asynchronous Vue processor or something. What's your experience there?
Not compatibility issues per se. So currently I'm running it against a Wicked application, and there the forms are often reloaded in place. And what you can do there is create a route without a response object, and then Cypress will just listen for that request, and then you can actually wait on it. So we didn't. That's not in this tutorial, I think, but I use that a lot. That I know that, for example, selecting an item from a drop-down, it will change the form. Then I can actually wait for that backend request to be made, and only then start getting items from that form.
Yeah, so probably this is mostly solved by waiting on an element to appear, a backend to call to be made, etc.
Yeah. And often Cypress does all these waits automatically. So if you visit a page, it will wait for the page to be loaded. If you get an element by a label, for example, by default it will wait for 4 seconds for that element to show up, because it might be loaded asynchronously. So there's a lot of sensible defaults in there. You can increase that limit as well for a specific call or the timeout. What you should never have to do is wait for 1 second, for example, because that will make your tests run incredibly slow and slower all the time. But what you can do is wait for an actual backend request to have happened. And that way it runs as fast as it can.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jogchem. Thanks also to our audience for participating and asking questions.
Thanks
if you have any more questions, feel free to ask them over the chat. We will do a short break, and now we'll be back in 5 to 10 minutes, so expect the next talk to start around 8 o'clock local time. Thanks a lot, and see you back in a bit.
Okay, bye-bye.